This is a party with a renewed sense of vigour, a party that says it has something different to sell and people are buying it.
All I can say is thank you, Boris. When they said we're going to have an election, everything's just gone mad.
Yeah, people are preparing for a general election, so yeah, they're buying things too.
And the shelves are empty because of it.
Yes, they are.
When that general election does come today, the Liberal Democrats voted for what they would be campaigning on.
Could I see all of those in favour of the motion, please raise your speakers cards. That is overwhelmingly carried. Thank you very much, everyone.
That vote making their position to revoke Article 50 and cancel Brexit.
Clearly it's gone down well in this room, but how will that policy go down with the rest of the nation? A policy to cancel the Brexit that millions of people voted for. Just how democratic are the Liberal Democrats being?
We're talking about going into an election campaign where we make very clear that a vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote to revoke Article 50 if we form a majority government. And if the public, in their wisdom, decide to vote for a Liberal Democrat majority government, then we will do what we've said we would do in that election. So I think that's a very clear democratic position.
This has always been the party of Remain, but fighting an election on blocking Brexit instead of a second referendum is a mistake to see those fighting Leave seats.
It's been decided in the last week. It hasn't been properly thought through. And I suppose that it does mean that one has to say that the youth of the leadership may be an issue here.
What do you fear? What do you worry how this is going to go down with the rest of the population?
I am distinctly worried that that it will alienate people who voted Leave and might have been considering coming back to vote Remain.
But the Lib Dems aren't the only ones not in favour of Brexit, according to the man behind the referendum. David Cameron says Boris Johnson was against it too. Today, published in the Sunday Times, the old Prime Minister said of the new one, he risked an outcome he didn't believe in because it would help his political career. About the referendum campaign, Michael Gove said that EU immigration would mean up to 5 million extra people coming to Britain by 2030 and pointed to the EU's stated objective of admitting Turkey. If the £350 million had bent the truth, this assertion stretched it to breaking point, adding later, Leave was lying. The man behind that campaign, Dominic Cummings, now advisor to Boris Johnson, took those claims about Turkey and turned them into Facebook adverts. Whatever the Lib Dems campaign the next election on, they'll be doing it with a couple of extra MPs among their ranks.
I forgot I was going to have you guys following me today.
The question before that election happens, how many more will be joining them?
Well, Paul's with me now. Paul, what are the chances of the Lib Dems getting their way and revoking Brexit?
Well, the Lib Dems may well want to cancel Brexit, but one person with no intention of that whatsoever is the Prime Minister. He said in an interview overnight that a deal is in sight, that I think we will get there in the end, and there's real sign of movement in Berlin, Paris, and most interestingly, in Dublin. Now, tomorrow he goes to Luxembourg and he has his first meeting with the Euro Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, and he's going to be saying, well, look, you might be seeing movement, but we need to see movement from you. Now, look, the Prime Minister has always said he wants a deal, but the mood is that when he says that now, people are a little bit more convinced by him than they were a couple of weeks ago.
Paul, thanks very much. Well, earlier I spoke to Sam Gyimah, now a Liberal Democrat MP, and I began by asking him how hard it was for him to leave a party he'd spent 2 decades with.
Well, emotionally, very difficult decision. 20 years, I've served on the front bench. I've got long-standing friends in the Conservative Party, both locally and nationally. I had resigned from the government last November, and I backed a second referendum. And that put me on the wrong side of many in the political part, in the Conservative Party.
You've spoken about how since the referendum, the sort of mood in the country has become more intolerant. Have you yourself faced hostility, discrimination within the country, racism?
Well, the country is polarised, it is divided. What is worrying now is that this is not just about Brexit. The tone of political debate, when you have senior politicians in this country dismissing independent judges, dismissing experts, all that is doing is it licenses the worst aspects of debate. It is beholden on all of us politicians to behave in a responsible way, but the creeping nationalism and populism into the Conservative Party that Boris Johnson sometimes feels so willing to embrace is not very helpful.
Today, David Cameron, his memoirs have been published. He accuses Boris Johnson of lying. Would you agree with that? Have you experienced that personally?
But it is very clear that there are a lot of Boris's positions that just are inconsistent. He told us when we voted to stop No Deal that it will chop him off at the knees in terms of his negotiations. And the next day he says a deal is vanishingly close. Which one is it?
Has Boris Johnson ever lied to you personally?
The conversation I had with Boris before he was elected was that about No Deal, and he said he doesn't want No Deal. I took him at his word that he doesn't want No Deal, and that is why I was surprised that he withdrew the whip from us when we voted to stop No Deal.
You're the 6th MP to join the Lib Dems since the whole fallout over Brexit. Some of your views and some of your new colleagues' views as well are not necessarily aligned. And I'm thinking, for example, you filibustered during a debate on whether to pardon men like Alan Turing of sodomy offences in the past. Are you ashamed of doing that now?
Not at all. Turing's law is law, and which pardons those wrongfully convicted of gay offences, because I was the minister that brought that legislation to pass. The process of bringing the legislation was fraught in Parliament. There was a private member's bill that was defective, and governments can't pass defective laws. That is why we had to stop that private member's bill. In terms of making law, there was also the other side, the risk on the other side, that you pardoned people that had done something wrong. So we had to tread a fine line.
What do you say to those Conservatives wrestling with their future, having made the decision you've made?
I would say that there is no deal that Boris Johnson will bring, that the ERG, the extreme right wing of the Conservative Party, will accept, that would satisfy the Labour Party. So the Conservative Party is essentially a no deal party. And if you're against no deal, then you've got to act, and the time is now.
Join the Lib Dems?
Of course.
Sam Gyimah, thanks very much. Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to the Conservative MP for Bournemouth East, Tobias Ellwood, former Defence Minister, and I started by asking him how significant Sam Gyimah's defection was.
People don't consider themselves Conservatives or Labour or Liberal Democrats anymore. It's your position on Brexit, which is defining who you are. Once we actually resolve Brexit, once we get past that line, I hope that we'll return to more traditional politics as we see in this country. Well,
the Brexit Secretary has said that the landing zone for a deal is in sight, that there could be a long transition period to 2022. So clearly, compromise is in the air. But how on earth are you going to sell that to the ERG?
We need to, and it's important that they recognise that the same punishment was inflicted on the 21 of those who voted against the government last week will also be impacted on them too. I want to see a deal put back on the table. We have Labour MPs as well in Brexit-facing seats. With the DUP also want to support a deal. We are very tantalisingly close. We do need to allow those discussions to continue. Where we'll find out is actually on the 14th of October. That's when we have the EU summit, and that's when the Prime Minister, after his meetings with Jean-Claude Juncker and indeed the Irish Prime Minister, hopefully will come to fore.
But everybody's got a compromise.
They do. I mean, I voted Remain. In this constituency here, but this constituency also voted to leave. I've had to step forward slightly from my own position. What we're seeing with a party here is locking themselves down into an anchored position that they're refusing to budge from. And you just mentioned the Brexiteers, they're wanting no deal as well. It's no wonder this nation is frustrated with this Parliament, because all of us have been so locked into our own position that we've been polarised. We need to get this through. It requires all of us just to nudge forward from our anchored positions.
Well, doesn't that include the Prime Minister? He's repeatedly said that he needs to come out October the 31st, do or die. He's still suggesting that's the case, still suggesting he would defy the law. What are the consequences if he does that, if he defies the law? requesting him to ask for an extension?
There's an awful lot of talk about this. We are lawmakers, not lawbreakers. Make that very, very clear. That's what our party is all about. What needs to be clear, though, as well, is that how long do we want to drag this on? Ultimately, the normal reset button, as you press, is a general election. If we can't make up our minds up in Parliament, get the nation to reformat what Parliament is so we can then decide.
Just finally, Boris Johnson has compared the UK to the Incredible Hulk about to break free of the manacles of the EU. What do you think of that analogy?
Well, I mean, he does use some colourful language, there's no doubt about it. I think let's stay focused on the art of the possible. I stress we are tantalisingly close to the deal. It does require my colleagues to step away from their very, very locked position that they've been in up to date. The nation is watching us, wanting us to conclude this. Let's get on with it.
Tobias Ellwood, thank you very much.